last time we spoke with the grammar school chapel prior to our break, we talked about a contrast of two people, two former students of mine, and we looked at Psalm 1. Today I want to look at a contrast of two people as well, but I want to look at a contrast that Jesus makes in this last week of his life. So we're coming up on the Easter season, and this is one of the last messages, public messages, that Jesus really preaches that the crowds hear. In fact, it is his last message. So in Luke chapter 20, he highlights this statement. When all the people were listening, Jesus said to his disciples, "Beware of the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and love to be greeted in the marketplaces and have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. Such men will be punished most severely." So the first type of person that Jesus is going to lay out in this rebuke, in fact, if you looked at Matthew's gospel, Matthew has a much longer account of this message that Jesus gives, but he's going to give this scathing rebuke against the leadership. And his warning is to beware. Beware of the examples of the leadership, of the religious leadership. Now, we would think that the leadership would be examples to follow. And in fact, for our school and for most of Christianity, this is a reality, that in order to be a leader, you have to be one that is living a life that's an example to follow. And that was true for the Israelites as well, except for the fact that these leaders were not being examples to follow. So that Jesus is going to say to them, beware, for those of you that are Latin students and those that are studied beyond that, this is an imperative, a present imperative. Continuously, in the syntax, it's an iterative or a customary. Continue to be aware of this example. Don't let it creep into your life. Now, what is the example that he says? How does he describe them? What are they supposed to beware of? Well, they like to walk around in flowing robes and love to be greeted in the marketplaces and have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at the banquets. What is it that they like? What is it that these people love doing? They love being looked at with respect. They love walking around showing their nice robes flowing. They love being sitting in the seat of honor in the synagogue. When you were to walk into a first century synagogue, there was a seat that was called the seat of Moses. The seat of Moses was reserved for either those that were teaching for the day or for those that were just of prestigious honor and they wanted to honor them in the synagogue. Well, here Jesus says, beware of that. They love to sit in these seats. They love to be out in front of everybody. They love the long robes. They love to have the seat of honor at a banquet. They love to be greeted in the marketplace. So they love the fact that when they go to the marketplace, people recognize who they are. And they say, oh, look who it is, look who it is. It's the famous rabbi. Beware of that, Jesus says. And now notice what he says. They devour widows' houses. Now, he doesn't go into any great detail as to what's going on, but something that the leadership was doing was causing the abused, the poor, the widows, to be abused. Maybe they were just taking advantage of their hospitality. Maybe they were taxing them too much. Maybe they were requiring so many requirements of them to give something, or that they had such a debt that they would end up consuming the widows' houses. Beware of that, Jesus says, because all the while the leadership was doing this, yet they like to show for a show to make lengthy prayers. Do you see the hypocrisy there? On the one hand, they are abusing one of the most oppressed people in a culture in the first century, especially the widows who didn't have people taking care of them. They were oppressing them. But all the while, when it came to the synagogue, they loved making these lavish prayers. Long prayers. Prayers that would cause others to look at them and say, oh, wow, how eloquent. How much of the scriptures do they know? Meanwhile, they weren't living like it. That's a problem. It's hypocritical. And Jesus says, because of that, such men will be punished most severely. So what's Jesus' his word? His command? What is the message of him for us today? It's the same thing. Beware of their example. Don't follow in this example. Now, why would, if we're going to take it from the first century setting and the context into our setting in the 21st century, we need to think through a couple of things. What's the heart of what Jesus is getting after? At the heart of it is pride. At the heart of it is wanting to be seen. At the heart of it is even saying one thing while treating other people differently. Saying that you love God while you treat people that are made in the very image of God like they're trash. Something's wrong with that picture. So as we think about bringing that message into our culture, let's talk about this for a second. Does America in the 21st century have a pride problem? Do Americans like to be seen as a whole? When we look at the culture, let's put it within the sports settings. We're in March Madness right now. What happens when a team wins? What happens when somebody makes a three-pointer and then they look at the stands and they do like this, right? Or they make some type of great play and all of a sudden they're giving their opponent a look. Or they celebrate themselves so much. What are they doing? They're liking to be seen. Here is the reality, that the sins of the culture become the sins of the church. And the reality is that sin is so impactful, it's so insidious that it can impact every aspect of our lives, even our motivations. And if we're not careful, our motivations will often even be done for the wrong reasons. Is it bad to make a three-pointer? No. Is it bad to sing on a show that gives you the opportunity to win or to make a life as a musician? No, it's not necessarily bad. Is it bad to want to be seen and to be prideful and to be arrogant and just to look after, to want to be the person that everybody looks up to so that you can show how great you are? Yes. And if we're not careful, even in our athletics or even in our drama presentations, in our Science Olympiad and our mock trial, if we're not careful in our artwork, we will deceive ourselves, and our motivations all of a sudden are not for the right reasons. All of a sudden our motivations become for our glory instead of the glory of God. And what Jesus says is, beware of this. You have to continuously beware of it because it's a sin that you're going to have to watch out for. It's not like today you say, oh, I've licked pride today. I didn't live a prideful life today. And then tomorrow you get up and say, well, I defeated pride yesterday, so I never have to worry about it again. No. This is something that you're going to have to battle for the rest of your life. Because we like to be, we want the world to revolve around us. Students, let me talk to the younger students for a minute. Those of you especially that have siblings. If you go into the cookie jar and there's 3 of you in the house and there's only 2 cookies, what's the first thing you think about? Ourselves, yeah. I want one of those last 2 cookies. Well, we know that one person's not going to get a cookie. If there's only 2 left, and there's 3 of us left, unless we split a cookie in half, which would be a nice thing to do, would be an option. Instead, we want to say, I want to get one of the last cookies. Can I have one of the last cookies? Or we even go beyond that, and we take the cookie and we hide it so that our sibling can't find it. Why? Is it necessarily bad to have a cookie? No. But when we're thinking about ourselves over and against somebody else, then that's the problem. And Jesus is saying, beware of that. Beware of this reality. And the reality that I said before, that the sins of the culture end up becoming the sins of the church is a realistic problem that we're having in our culture, in our society today. And if you, students, are going to go out and impact this culture for Christ, You've got to make sure that you're being more transformed to the image of Christ than being conformed to the very image of this world. Romans 12. That we're called to be conformed to Christ, not conformed to this world. To be transformed by the renewing of our minds. And we have to daily go through this process. So what Jesus does here is he takes this opportunity, having warned against the sin of the example of the leadership, now he's going to give a new example of a widow. Here are the widows that were being devoured by the leadership, but now here's another widow who is giving us an example to follow. So in chapter 21, as he looked up, so Jesus now in his first message was giving them from the steps of right outside the temple. Now he's into the temple, and he looks up and he saw the rich putting their gifts into the temple treasury. So here's the temple treasury. He sees the rich people going up and they're giving these huge gifts. And he sees them bringing these great gifts to the temple, but then he sees a widow. He sees this widow come, and she put in 2 very small copper coins. Greek word is lepta, right? Singular lepton. A lepton, a small copper coin. The old KJV said that the widow's mites. So sometimes some of you may have heard the widow's mites. This is what he's talking about. A lepton was a fraction of the smallest portion of the payment for the day. It's less than a penny even. In the ancient world, this would be about, commentators go through this and they say, this would be equivalent to about 5 minutes of work in a typical workday. So the amount of money that you would make in 5 minutes is the amount that she's giving. Now, outwardly, does that look like much money? Does it? No. 5 minutes of work is not much. However, for a widow who's got nothing, she's giving all that she has. She's giving out of her lack. She's giving a tremendous amount. So Jesus looks at her and he says, I tell you the truth. This poor widow has put in more than all the others. What do you mean she's put in more than the others? I saw people bring all these great wealth and bring them to the temple and to give it, and she just brings in 5 minutes of work for the average worker. But Jesus says that 5 minutes, that little bit that she gave is greater than the vast amount of wealth that this other person gave. And he's highlighting the fact that this poor widow, and in fact, notice what he says, all these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she gave out of her poverty. She, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on. What's the message for us today? If we look at the first warning, it's really a warning against checking our motivations and checking our pride. The first example to not follow is the example of the leadership. The example to follow is the example of the widow, who is willing from her heart to put God above everything else. That's what we're called to do. We are called to be a community that exalts God, that has God at the very center of our lives, that's willing to sacrifice for Him. What is it in your life that you aren't willing to sacrifice for the Lord? Prestige? Money? Technology? Apps on your phone? I don't know, whatever it is. Is there anything in your life that you really value more than the Lord? If you do, that's called an idol. And we have to constantly beware of our motivations. It's not just today you lick it and then tomorrow you don't have to worry about it again. Every day you wake up and it's a matter of saying, Lord, you're going to be first in my life today. And if there's an area of my life that is not pleasing to you, show it to me, reveal it to me, and I will repent and I will make it right. May that be true of us as a community. If we are going to fulfill our mission to impact this culture for Christ, it's going to come from us putting God first in everything, from loving the Lord with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. which will lead to us loving our neighbor as ourselves. Seniors, you guys got 2 months left. If you're going to make an impact on the college campuses, it's going to come from you putting Christ first. You're going to be tempted with all types of different temptations on your college campuses. Doesn't matter whether it's a Christian campus, a secular university, a small private, doesn't matter. You're going to face temptations. You're going to face decisions to make every day. Put Christ first. Make sure you're not making any idols that are replacing God as Lord of your life. Students, that's our calling today. Let's do it. Let's follow the example of the widow who's willing to give out of her very life to give it back to the Lord as an act of worship. May we give the Lord our very lives like this widow. I mean, think about it for a second. This widow, who's unnamed, has now been talked about for over 2,000 years because of her example. She is making an impact on us today. Follow her example and make an impact on your culture in the same way. Let's pray.